Thank you to Matteo and for everybody at the Typewriters Club. It's a really huge honor to be here at Book Night. I've been coming here for a long time, so it's really cool to be speaking to all of you tonight. As Matteo said, until very recently, I used to be the art director of a small company called Melville House. It's a really small literary publisher, and officially my job title there was art director. At least that was the idea. But it turns out when you go to work for a small company with only like 6 people sitting in one room in Brooklyn, you end up wearing a lot of different hats all the time. So I thought I would take you through some of the other jobs I had at Melville House, and along the way share some work that I don't normally get to talk about very much. So first of all, I did every once in a while, like once a year, I actually got to act like an art director and hire somebody to do something. So, for example, this is an early cover I did, sort of right after I got there, where I hired a very talented photographer named Eric Anderson to shoot this image, which he did very beautifully. And later, we worked again on this cover, which is an anthology of true crime. This was one of our interns at the time modeling, very shifty guy. So that happened every once in a while, but we were, like I said, we were very small, and all of the resources we had from selling books, we really poured back into buying more manuscripts, expanding the list, expanding our outreach, and so there just weren't a lot of resources for art, so we kind of just had to make do with what we could make in-house. And so a lot of the time that meant that I ended up illustrating things. If you can't afford photography or whatever, you can illustrate it. And I'm not really a natural born draftsman, but I do enjoy it when I can do it. So one example of a job or a project that I illustrated is the Last Interview series. This is a series of books featuring conversations with recently deceased authors, most of them. And instead of trying to track down photography of all these people that would sort of look like they went together, I decided to do these portraits of the authors instead. So this is a really fun project. What was great about it is that it also, as opposed to using photography, it gave everything a cohesive look, brought it all together, gave it kind of like a cooler look, which we were going for. These things do really well in like college markets, college bookstores, things like that. We wanted them to feel sort of young and fresh and like something a cool young English major would sort of pick up and keep in their pocket, and so those did really well. We kind of pushed this idea a little bit further with our international crime series. This had been started by my predecessor, the inimitable Kelly Blair, who's here somewhere. Shout out to Kelly Blair. She had, I think, just started the series when I took over for her, and so we kind of pushed this idea a little bit further. The idea in this series was that every author kind of got his or her own illustrated look, like his or her own style, and then within that we would do 4, 5, 6 covers, pushing that style further along. So the whole series kind of looked like it came from one imprint. They all belonged together, but then each author got their own look. And then, of course, we did this for the Neversink Library as well. This was our classics reprint series. And really what we needed, we were just going to be doing tons of these. We were cranking them out, I think, 12 or 15 a year. And so we just needed something that we could do very quickly without having to license photography that would stand out in some way. And this is the solution that we came up with. And what I really love about these is that so many of the classics lines that are out there are just sort of like an old painting with a type in a box sort of on top of it. And these look really different. Also, a little known fact about my time at Melville House is that I designed and typeset all of the interiors for the books, which is a lot of work. I just heard like a small groan from there. And I'm here to tell you that you haven't lived until you've tried to set a 2-column list inside a footnote in InDesign. InDesign won't do it. It's like literally the hardest thing I've ever done. This is from Walt Whitman's diaries, which are actually really great. And speaking of typography, in the fall of 2012, we published this cookbook called The Duke's Table. It's really cool. It was one of the first ever vegetarian cookbooks written. It was written in the 1930s. And we decided to give it this sort of Italian deco package. But when I was working on the interior, I couldn't find the typefaces that really felt exactly right to me. So I did something slightly crazy, which is that I decided to design my own. So this I called Salaperuzza script after the author, who was the Duke of Salaperuzza in Italy. Matteo, maybe you're related? I don't know.
Yeah.
Great. Are you a vegetarian?
No, but he was.
Okay. That's good, because you wrote the book on it. So I put this together. What was really awesome about designing a typeface for your own book that you're working on the interior of is that as I was typesetting and working on the interior, if some problem came up or some unusual letter combination happened, I could just go fix the typeface, which is not something you can do very often. That said, if you're a really busy person, I would strongly advise against designing your own typeface for a one-off project. So some of the projects I did that I'm most excited about are actually things that I don't get to show or talk about very often because they weren't ever consumer-facing. I also worked on sales and marketing materials like catalogs, posters, one-sheets, things like that. And it was a really cool opportunity to be involved in a little bit of a broader way of what the brand of the house was, how we were perceived, how we were selling our books. One challenge that we faced a lot of the time was because we were a small publisher working with relatively unknown authors, we were always competing for shelf space in bookstores or displays. Because the more displays you get, the more people see the books, the more people buy the books, the more sales you get, the more money you make, the more books you can publish. So it was really important to do what we could to get our books just seen in bookstores, but we couldn't often get co-op. So we had to do it the old-fashioned way, which was just to convince booksellers that our books were awesome and they should display them everywhere. So we put together a couple of campaigns while I was there to try and do that. And this is one that was really cool. This is a little handout that we came up with that folds down. The idea is that we would take it to book conferences like BEA or whatever, and we could hand them out to people. They could stick them in a tote bag. Also, our reps took them to libraries and to colleges. And as you unfold the poster, it has some sales copy. There's like a full list of all the titles in this series that is really helpful for academics and librarians working on their collections. And then when you unfold it all the way and turn it onto the back, it turns into this large, it's like a 24 by 36 poster. And this is the Art of the Novella series, which you might have seen. This is designed by David Knopf back in the early days of Melville House. And what we decided to do is rather than tell the booksellers, you should display our books all the time everywhere, we thought we would just sort of give them a gentle nudge, like, look, these are really colorful, you can have a lot of fun when you start to put them together. So on the poster and in all of our other materials, like in catalogs, online, anytime we were showing novellas anywhere, we would sort of arrange them loosely into a color spectrum, which had to be sort of imperfect because of all the different colors that were in there. But it just seemed like a fun thing to do. If you're going to show them, why not arrange them in some colorful way? And what's really great is that not long after we started handing this poster out, we started getting photos in from our sales reps. This is from Bank Square Books, I think, in Cambridge, where booksellers were actually doing it without really any prompting. This was another little display, so we started getting like end caps that we didn't have to ask for, we were just getting them. And then a really weird thing happened where the poster itself became this kind of sought-after item. So this is from a staff area at the Brooklyn Public Library on Eastern Berkeley, and they have the poster. There's also another little poster that we did for a series within the novellas. And people started coming up to us at BEA and everywhere asking if they could buy the poster, which is kind of like, no, please take all of them, give them to everyone you know. But it's really great. We started hearing that booksellers were putting them up in their break rooms, like at bookstores, so that the people who worked there were like seeing them constantly, thinking about them, they could be reminded to talk about them to customers. So that project really paid off for us in a pretty big way. And then we later did another campaign similar to that for the Neversink Library, that classics reprint line. And this is sort of an example of what happened after that. This is from the opening night of Foyle's, the big bookstore in London. When they opened their new flagship store on Charing Cross Road, they picked the Neversink Library as the first books to display in these like fancy new display cases they had. So these photos are actually from their opening night party. And even as recently as last week, a friend of mine sent me this from the Mission in San Francisco, that these books are up at the windows. So this was a really cool sort of opportunity that I think a lot of art directors don't get to have as often, which is to integrate what they're doing into all the other aspects of their publisher, and to have a role in, to find a role for design not just in the books themselves, but how the books are presented. And again, we didn't pay for these displays. They just happened, and that translates to more book sales. It is really fun to work on the books themselves, and sometimes a really fun one would come along. I don't know if any of you are familiar with David Reese, the comedian. We were all really big fans of his from Get Your War On, which was the comic strip he made about George Bush and the War on Terror. And he came in one day to talk to us about his new business venture, artisanalpencilsharpening.com. So we turned his project into a book. If you haven't seen it, this is an actual 224-page instruction manual full of real information about how to sharpen pencils, and that's all that's in it. I ended up editing this book, kind of working directly with David. He actually turned in 300 pages in his first draft, so he's a very thorough guy. And the joke of the book is sort of that there is no joke, because it is all real, but it's still very funny. The writing is very witty. There's a lot of one-liners and witticisms in it. And it was a really cool opportunity working directly with him. We would just spend like 4 hours on the phone in the afternoon polishing jokes and refining the writing. And you kind of find out like how comedy works when you talk to someone like that. I contributed approximately 3 jokes which are still in the book. And the one that I'm most proud of is one that only one reviewer ever noticed, as far as I'm aware. If you look at the top of the book, the headband is pink like a rubber eraser. And then if you flip the book over, the footband is gray, like a pencil lead. David was very excited when he found it. It's probably the world's first ever book production joke. So that was fun. Most of the time when I'm working, honestly, I'm kind of just trying to amuse myself first, and then hopefully something comes out of that works for the book. Sometimes this can get me into a little bit of trouble. This is a book written by the publisher of Harper's Magazine, Rick MacArthur, about the problems in our democratic process, why not just anyone can become president, like we're all sort of told. And I don't know, my favorite days in Melville House were really the ones we were sitting around the conference table thinking, are we gonna get in trouble for doing this? And we had a lot of those conversations. I'm really grateful that Rick let us do this particular joke on the cover of his actually very serious book. I think what worked for us here is that the joke is such a slow burn that anyone who would be offended by the implied denial of respect to the American flag just never got the joke. So that worked out okay for us. And then sometimes things just kind of go a little bit off the rails, I guess. This is a novel that I really love. It's a modern day retelling of Ludwig Wittgenstein's time at Cambridge, which sounds very boring, but it's totally hilarious. It's really edgy, it's funny, and in the end, it's really sweet and lovely. It kind of turns into a romance. And this was actually not the first cover that I came up with, because when I saw the title at our launch, I knew exactly what the cover had to be, and then I raced to my computer and did it in 20 minutes, and that was this. And it was one of those things that I did. I sort of did this. It doesn't make any sense in terms of how it relates to the book. It doesn't really have anything to do with the book, but somehow it just perfectly captures the spirit of what this book is about. And I got really excited about it. I finished photoshopping it and laughed for 10 minutes. And then we sent it to the author, and the author was like, "This is so great. You have captured perfectly what I was going for with this book. I'm so on board. I love it. We have to do this." And so that was just amazing sort of confirmation that yes, this is weird, but it works. Unfortunately, then we took it to sales conference, and the sales reps were so horrified by it that they literally averted their eyes and couldn't look at it. And we did a little further surveying. I asked my mom what she thought of these things. And we found that exactly 50% of the people thought this was the funniest thing they had ever seen. And 50% of the people literally could not bear to look at it. And I don't understand, I'm not a sociologist, I don't understand why, but I find that split is exactly along gender lines. This is what our sales conference experience told us. I don't know. So, unfortunately, in the end, it was decided that we could not afford to alienate half of what was already likely to be a very small audience for this book, and we decided to go with a more conservative, toned-down version. In the end, I kind of regret that we didn't push further. I'm doubly regretful because I had actually already worked up the sequel little lightlets. Very cute. A little 17th century philosophy action going there. So, this is all really silly, but if I could be, if you will just allow me to be earnest for 1 minute. When I was looking back over all of the work to prepare for this talk, what really stood out to me was the amount of stuff that we accomplished as a publishing house that is just really incredible, bringing incredible writers and unusual voices out into the world that I'm like so proud to have been a part of. And if I could just run through really quickly a very short list of highlights. While I was at Melville House, we published the book that became the Bible of the Occupy Wall Street movement, written by its ideological founder and the guy who coined the phrase "We are the 99%," David Graeber. This is the UK cover. The US cover was designed by Carol Hayes.
Carol Hayes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Very brilliantly. David Graeber actually has a radio series on the BBC right now that's based on this book, which is incredible, and they don't like change the way you think about money and everything. It's incredible. We published the first and only biography of Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean novelist. We published an Iranian novelist who was censored and imprisoned because of his writing in his home country. We published a Russian journalist who was assassinated because of her writing about Vladimir Putin. We brought new life to Soviet-era dissident fiction. And we published the most outrageous and daring contemporary fiction that I've ever read. We published 1 Nobel Prize winner, 2 Holocaust survivors, and we found a long-lost manuscript by James Agee, one of the great American writers of the 20th century, with photographs by Walker Evans. And we brought out this 800-page epic modernist novel about the Liverpool Football Club, bound in red cloth with red edges, red end papers, and red headbands. So we took the title very seriously there. But really, when I look back on all of this stuff, it reminds me, you get caught up in the sort of the day-to-day of deadlines and jobs getting killed and stress and everything, and it's easy to forget why we do this. And when I look back at this work, it just reminds me, the stuff we did there was so important, and these are really like world-changing books that had a huge impact. And I came to this because I'm a lifelong reader, and I think that literature is really important. It's still as vital and important as it ever was. And just to have had any role in any one of those projects is like a tremendous privilege. To have gotten to work on all of those and so many more in such a short time is just like the most thrilling experience I'm sure I'll ever have. But all good things must come to an end. I will say that after 4 and some odd years at Melville House doing all of these things, I was a little bit tired, to say the least. By the end, our list was about 60 titles a year, and we were still doing everything in-house. And I think more than anything, I found that this experience of working there totally independently, with actually very little oversight, was really incredible especially at a young age, for developing my own sort of confident voice as a designer. But I also was starting to miss being around other creative people and learning from them and seeing, what new things I could do. So last fall, I was asked if I was interested in an open studio space at the Pencil Factory in Brooklyn. If you haven't seen this before, it's a giant warehouse building full of artist lofts and musicians and all kinds of different creative people work there. And it just really seemed like the perfect time to strike out, find a new creative community and see what other kinds of trouble I could get into. So I thought I would wrap up by sharing a few of the projects I've been working on. I'm really sort of just getting up to speed. It's been only a few months. But I thought I'd share a few of the projects, some outtakes, some kill covers and things that are very up to the minute. Actually extremely up to the minute, because this job got killed literally like 20 minutes after I sent in my slides this morning. But this was with Sarah Wood at Echo, very lovely Sarah Wood. It's a history of the world through the lens of important objects of jewelry. I wanted to share a sort of outtake to the outtake here, because sometimes I just come up with Photoshop disasters and send them to the art director anyway. This was... I'm kind of sad we didn't go with this, actually. So maybe you could take that back to the author. This was for Bridget Pearson at Grand Central, sort of a New York City public school teacher's memoir of his experiences. For Stephanie Finks at the Harvard Business Review Press, this is about how government should play a more active role in shaping the economy through aiding businesses. I would like to say that all of these ideas are for sale tonight, if anyone is interested. This is for the New Press. This is a novel written in the form of hip-hop lyrics. It was very cool. One thing that happened with this is similar to, but not the final cover, and when they sent my cover to the author, they said, we really like this, but like the lettering is just a little fishy. And I thought I had done like a pretty good job with this graffiti lettering. And, but this is the best author feedback I've ever gotten. The author went to a friend of his who's a graffiti writer and just had without any prompting, had the graffiti writer do new lettering for me, and then scanned it and sent it in, and then that job was done. So like, if only all authors, like if you, not only do you have feedback, but then you can also provide the solution. So I think it's really great about working for left-wing publishers is you can just go full communism with their covers, and then get really excited about it. I couldn't believe they totally love this. Also, full communism. This is for Verso books about profiteering in the private prisons industry, among other things. Back to Capitalism. This is for Chris Sergio, the handsomest man in publishing. I keep saying that because I'm trying to get it approved. I'm not above. Yeah, I'm not above using flattery.
It's working.
Great. Let's email tomorrow and we'll.
Okay. Tonight.
Okay. This is for Catherine Casalino at 12. I hear she's related somehow to Chris Sergio, but I don't know about that. White Jewish. And this, I think this actually is a final approved cover, I think, for Christopher Lim, formerly of Simon & Schuster, the new Joe Klein book about soldiers who come home from the Iraq War and start service organizations to help people here at home. So that's where I am now. It's still kind of coming up to speed. Those are just a few of the projects I'm working on. I have some really exciting long-term projects that are in development that sadly I can't talk about yet. But thanks so much for giving me the time, letting me show up for it.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm going to talk about the process for some of my covers, collaborations with illustrators and photographers, and some recent inspiration. First, I'd like to talk about assholes. Not that often I get the chance to work on the book with such a great title. And this author proposes a theory about assholes. Managing the assholes in our lives begins with understanding who they are. His book is a serious, provocative statement on what constitutes an asshole, but it's also very funny. So with a title like this, it seemed a bit unnecessary to over-design. I tried a few things here, just keeping the title on the front cover, which would have been nice, but we didn't go with it. They wanted to include all the information, and this is pretty straightforward, just big, clean serif type. And I don't have much more to say about this one. It's just, it is what it is. Great title to say. Girl in the Dark is a memoir of a young woman who writes of her sensitivity to light, which has forced her to live in darkness. My initial comps for this included versions of a black cover with the type dotted in holographic foil, a dark blue cover with blind spot embossed type and just small white dots, and also a die-cut jacket with a printed case. And the jacket was meant to loosely resemble an iris, bits of blue through the die-cut, and on the case was an eclipse. So this die-cut design was approved, and the eclipse was something mentioned in the text many times. A few weeks before the book went to print, we had to look at it for a redesign because of a few issues. The print run was going to be much smaller than they initially anticipated, and the die-cut would be too expensive, and Amazon these days makes returns if there's more than 3 sorry, they pull the book if there's more than 3 returns. So at the last minute, we need to redesign this. I looked back at my original sketches to guide me, and I just thought about being alone in a dark room all day, day in and day out, and it's so hard to keep every bit of light from coming in, no matter how well you seal the windows. So there's little foil specks on this one. So the investigation. This story is about a humble and ordinary man who has been ordered to look into a series of suicides that have taken place at a huge sprawling complex in an unnamed town. It's humorous, it's a surrealist nightmare, and a search for self. Here, typically when I'm reading, I jot down notes on my iPhone, as you do, and there were just some images that came to mind as I was reading, and some of my initial sketches. And here are some initial comps that I worked on, which all worked within the same palette and were illustrative. But because everyone felt so faceless, I thought it would be funny to build a face from elements in the book, and such as the key and the window and the clock. And this is where it ended up. In Free Fall and Decompression were 2 books written by Julie Zeh, who's a German author, and we had her translations, which shows her spare and flowing text with a lot of movement. So in this first story, it's a story of men on bikes and motion and gravity. And here are some of my initial sketches that I actually just researched that I found. Here are some initial comps for this book. I wanted to have the bicycle on the front cover and give a sense of motion, but these didn't seem to be working, so I thought about just using cut paper, and I started to experiment with how I shot cut paper and the shadows that it created and the sense of gravity. And eventually I settled on this, and it was shot by Jeff Spear. So for her second book, I wanted to keep within the same look and give her a clean graphic look using just cut paper. And so this is a story of 3 people scuba diving off the coast in Spain, and one of them dies. And it's incredibly compelling and fast. I wanted to just create a sense of depth and the layering of the sea. And I figured out first how I would layer the type in order to cut the paper and make it work. And here are some of my initial cutouts and scans. And here's the final. We shot this using props between all of the layers to give it a bit more sense of depth. Swift River Rising. As we all know, the titles do change. This became Cascade. And this takes place in the summer town of Cascade in central Massachusetts. An artist moves back home there, and she tries to save the town that's to be flooded to create a new reservoir. So I began working with old postcards that Paul Buckley gave me, and I picked several that I felt could work. And I love the hand coloring on these and the line quality. Here's some of my first comps using these postcards with the old title. And then it changed titles, and Paul asked me to focus more on one image in particular. Then he asked me to focus more on the element of water in the book. And eventually he asked me to focus more on the protagonist and the sense of water. And so I tried to create an image that would combine the elements into a painterly effect. This is the final. The Modern Library Classics series was a great project given to me by Robin Schiff, and it was to recreate a look for all these books and come up with new spines that would stand out. And here's just some of my initial sketches for the series look. I picked up art from online portfolios and kept a catalog of pieces that could potentially work for different books. Here are pieces, these were approved final book covers that were all just found art. So I just found these art on online portfolios, and it hadn't been used before, commissioned for a book cover, so I was able to use them. And here are commissioned pieces, so I found some illustrators that I really loved the look of, and hired them to come up with new pieces. And for all these books, we only had one set of sketches, and then they went straight to final. The budget was low, so that's how they all worked. And just a few in particular, for Alice in Wonderland, I found this Japanese artist, Mari Katogi, and she had created her own series of Alice paintings and had them on her online portfolio. So I was able to use this piece of felt art. And for Frankenstein, I worked with Noma Bar, who has a clean, graphic, bold approach. And initially he gave me these sketches, and they're great. I just thought the palette should be a little bit more unusual for Frankenstein. So he gave me these, and we ended up here. Love Me Back is raw, fast, and direct. The author writes about a young single mother who becomes a waitress at an upscale restaurant in Dallas, and as her world becomes a series of late nights and long hours, she follows her self-destructive impulses. I wanted to create a cover that would portray the story's power simply yet compellingly, and I started looking at neon signs for inspiration. And originally I wanted to hire somebody to actually create a neon sign and have it shot, but I realized that probably wasn't going to happen, and I came across Rizzo & Perrine's portfolio online. And what I loved about his work is he created these neon signs, but he also had this exposed wiring, which added a whole other element to the piece. So the one caveat in using Rizzo was that he had to go straight to final. So I provided him these sketches, and once we decided on the sketch in-house, he created the art in full without any possibility for revisions. But we had to get approval entirely in-house and also from the author as an agent. And I think it worked out. He didn't have to make any changes in post. Transatlantic is Colin McCann's most recent paperback, and it's about Irish American history. And I like the idea of creating a quilt of sorts, which feels like the interconnectedness of the stories and characters in his writing. And here, all the images are seen from afar: the land, the sky, the water. But they didn't like this approach, so I started looking at another possibility of hanging panels of type. And so I tried rigging this myself with fishing line and shot them, creating shadows on the background images. And I ended up going with this one and hiring John Shireman to shoot it. And here's the final. The Unexpected Werewolf also changed titles and became The Vanishers. This is a novel. It's a story of mothers, daughters, and the psychic damage women can inflict on one another. It's very dark and funny. The author was very involved in this case, and she urged us to use the Barcelona chair as reference and to look at Sophie Cowell's photographic work for inspiration. I hired John Shireman, who bought a mini Barcelona chair from Mahon and shot it. He wanted to give it a sense of static and as though it had an appearance of a film still. And at some point or another, everyone agreed this just wasn't working. So the editor and author urged me in the direction of how Florid can become kind of gothic. And so they wanted it to be graphically wild and energetic. And here are just some of the versions I tried. I wanted the type to be knockout white, but eventually they pushed for it to be a purple foil. The Silent Land is a fantasy thriller. It's about a couple in a skiing town in the French Alps, and they get stuck in an avalanche and somehow survive. And the story is it's really about being somewhere between life and death. And here are some of my initial research that I pulled together. And I decided it would be great to use a vellum jacket over a case to give a sense of this sort of divide between life and death. And here are some more of my tighter sketches. And eventually, this is the printed case with blind spot gloss on the rest of the title in case you lost a jacket. And here's the vellum jacket and the final book. And the incident at Veladoux became Sea Lovers. Valerie Martin, in this book of selected stories, I focused on the last part, which was on metamorphosis. And there were a few stories in particular, one of a centaur, one of a mermaid, and one of a woman who turned into an owl. And I initially thought of using a centaur on the front and a mermaid on the back. I didn't want to give things away with this, and so my idea was to use a half jacket and to cover part of that animal man, and so it would be exposed once the jacket came off. These days, though, I find it hard to get a half jacket approved. They rip, and there's issues with Amazon returns. And so before I went down the road, I started thinking about how to achieve a similar effect with just a blind spot gloss on the jacket. And I ended up hiring this great illustrator, Eleftheria Alexandri, it's a hard name. And here are some of her initial sketches. Once the title changed to Sea Lovers, I actually thought it would be great to keep the centaur on the front, but they insisted on using the mermaid. So this was just some of the process of how we got to the final illustration. And just a few more recent covers. Supernotes takes place in Cambodia. It's a top-level undercover spy book. The Emissions just got killed. The Word Exchange is a dystopian novel about the dangers of technology and the end of books. And I looked at word jumble books for inspiration for this one. Bread and Butter, the photography was by Andrew Purcell. This is a foodie book about three brothers who open a restaurant. The Color Master is a story collection, and this is Tactile Typography by Dominique Falla. I designed the type layout, and she created the art using string and nails. I saw a man. I found this image on Flickr, actually. Stalked the photographer a little bit, and takes place on the border of Hampstead Heath. And Beetlebone. This is loosely based on the later life of John Lennon. And some recent inspiration. When my husband first moved in with me, he brought his favorite 1,000 records. And so every time I pick one out, it's a surprise because I don't know where anything is. And they're all just incredibly inspiring. He has a great collection of jazz and classical and Latin and world music. And these are just some of my favorites. The one on the right here is particularly special. And of course, my 8-month-old son who will chew on any record he can get his hands on. Thank you.
So, I have been lucky most of my life, and that's going to come up a little in this. I'll talk to you about what I'm going to talk about is the things that have influenced me as a designer and how I think about design, and maybe show a little bit of a few things of how I've come up with some of the designs in some ways. Staying a book cover designer without getting tired of previously explaining. I was extremely lucky 6 months out of school to get hired by Joe Perez and Darren Hager in the Viking Penguin art department. And I decided the best way to not design book covers that looked like anybody else's was to not look at any book covers. So I didn't look at anybody else's book covers. I decided not to look at book covers. And that was really hard. It made me, my first year, terrifying. And all I had was my feedback from my art directors on what I was doing and seeing the other ones from our small lists. But it was a struggle. And then a year later, I was even more extremely lucky, and I happened to land the job at Knopf, working for Carol Carson in the art department there. And I was terrified. It was thrilling and horrifying at the same time. I really didn't know. I was in over my head. I didn't know what I was going to do. And the thing about working around the people that I was surrounded by was not. I had to make designs that were as good as them, but also that were different from them. And all of a sudden, my not looking at book covers didn't really work because there was lots of book covers all around me. So I looked at theirs, but I tried not to look anywhere else. But I took over Gabriella Wilson's job, and I felt like I had, and in Knopf in general, I had to bring this sort of feeling of beauty to everything. But I was trying to do beauty in something in a way that was a little different, or push it a little, or not, something. And I think the most profound thing about working there for my first few years was having an office next to Peter Mendelsohn. And he would just do things all the time that, oh my God, that's what I wanted to do, and I couldn't do it like that. And so what it made me do is it made me actually try to design not like him, which is a weird thing, and especially now because he can just do anything. But at the time, he was sort of not quite there yet into his superstar amazing level, and so I was trying not to make things like him, or John Gall, or Carol, or Chip, or Abby Weintraub at the time. And so I pushed and did my own things, which were more awkward, or flat, or strange, or weird. And the things that I really loved were the ones where I felt like, okay, I made something that I haven't really seen. And again, I'm not looking at book covers, so maybe someone had done it, but yeah, that's the problem, not looking at the book covers, right? And I remember this is really the first thing that I did that I loved. And the thing I feel about most designs in general is that you're trying to create a unique visual moment. And the way that you achieve that is generally your formal execution, not necessarily a conceptual move. And so I have this tendency to lean on or think through design problems more through formal means than conceptual means. And this cover's always given me a bit of trouble with my ideas. I teach, I'll get to that. Because it has this conceptual thing. This is a book of short stories about these individuals who hate each other and hate themselves. So they torture themselves. They put themselves in these situations. So you have this wrestler wrestling himself, and that was the big thing. But I love this version, and this is what we sent to the author. I love this guy. I don't know what's coming out of his mouth. It's beautiful and weird and strange, and it made sense too. I mean, for me, this jacket was about the combination of that flat Venn diagram, formal beauty, with in a kind of contemporary, modern sense to the old illustration. And the stories were either in contemporary Texas football player or a Roman soldier on a wall 30,000 years ago. So it sort of had this weird range of historical presence. I love this guy. I tried to use him a couple times again after that, sometimes for Helen, for her books. And for those of you who don't know, I'm lucky enough to be married to Helen Yentis. And what that means for me is I have this person in my life who I love and trust, and who is an amazing designer and has an amazing eye. And so I've had this, and I'm sitting, people don't have this maybe, but sorry. I'm lucky, I told you. So that I can give things to her and show her and say, look, what do you think? And she'll say, and she trusts me and loves me and knows I trust her and love her, and say, that's terrible. Like, what is that? That's horrible. This conversation it's happened maybe 100 times where I show her and say, this part over here, that's really awkward. I think it's supposed to be awkward, and I stomp off. And then 10 minutes later, I come back, oh, I fixed it. It's good, it's fine. You're right. And we also worked together a lot for a while. Before she became the art director of Riverhead, we sort of were trying to become a studio. It didn't really work out, but there was these books that I love where these designs that we don't know really who did what, and they kind of have this special place in my heart. Mr. Fox is one of his amazing novels, by the way. It's beautiful. And The Way Through Doors, which is probably the best thing we've ever done as a complete team. We sketched this on the way back. We were trying to shoot my friend running through Coney Island, and then she was going to do some cutout weird things with him. And then on the way back in the subway, we talked and sketched, and then this came out of it. And mostly great because of her execution with the cut. And of course, and you all know this, and some of you hopefully are lucky enough to have experienced this, she's a great art director. So I've done work for her at Riverhead. This is another one of my favorite covers designs that I did for a beautiful novel by Doubleday. So I have that. So that's there. But the thing that I think has influenced me most or changed me most as a designer, at least the way I think about design, is teaching graphic design. So I teach the history of graphic design at Parsons, and I've done it for 8 years. I was lucky enough to be asked by my program director at the time, a semester after I graduated, because someone left and they needed to fill the spot. I asked that guy, he didn't do it. So again, I was terrified. Who, why, how could I teach the history of graphic design? And it made me, the thing that it did, it did a few things. I mean, I was exposed every week to these great examples of historical design that would then influence me, and in ways I was hoping I wasn't just ripping things off, and this is how I try to teach my students, is how do you take relationships that you see and use them and make them your own. But what it also does is it gave me a chance, or it forced me to develop a language of design, to be able to talk to other humans about why something's good or not good, or what's great about this thing. And I really gravitated toward this one phrase that Paul Rand said, which is the design is a set of relationships. And so that was the most useful thing that I've ever read or heard about, and that's the way I started to talk to my students. So things like, on this Forensic Songs cover, I wanted to smash this guy's head with a circle. And I had this little sketch. This thumbnail, and I was like, not another circle. I did a lot of circles. Like, not another circle. And then, oh, I can just push it with these angles coming out of the circle, and then it'll feel like it's moving in, and it'll work with force. I'll talk about this one in a second. The relationship, the design relationship that I am so fascinated with, and that it actually has affected most of my covers, if not all, the good ones at least, is this idea that Mahon talked about. He's an instructor at the Booher House. And he said the most important thing a picture maker can do, and he's talking about designers and painters, is to not give in to the illusion of 3 dimensions. Is to suggest dimension, but then disrupt it. So you have this idea of depth, but you don't have a disappearance into space. And so when I design things, it's always there. It's not something I have to do, and I don't have a style, but it's just always there because I feel like what it does is it allows you to make magic with 2 dimensions. We have the ability as print designers, or at least graphic designers that have 2 dimensions, whether they're on the screen or on a printed piece of paper, to do this thing where we suggest something that's not real. So here, I don't really use photography that well because of this. I can't do it. It doesn't have, I don't know how. But here I wanted to smash this guy's face, and I found a face who was actually kind of half smashed. He's pretty gnarly looking himself already. And then I just smushed paper. And the thing that makes this work for me is the fact that the violence is abstracted through that combination of flatness and dimension. So the photograph is disrupted by those wrinkles and the pushing with the thing. And I'm not saying any user or reader or potential reader is going to think that they're not going to pick this up and think, oh, look how that designer did that thing with the dimension and the 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions. But they're going to feel it because it's not a picture of a ball smashing someone's head. It's not so. It's direct without being gross or blatant, or it's something that does something to your mind that allows for it to be somehow visually different or special or unique. This is probably my favorite design that I've ever done. I did it right at the end of my time at Knopf. And this is a book of poems by a woman who just is going through a separation and divorce. That's what the poems are about. And the idea of nothing by design is that her life has been ripped into chaos, and how does she gain order? And this is what she's doing through this book, by writing these beautiful words and organizing her language. It's just this creation of herself and the order in her life through this moment. In one of the poems, she looks out the window, and there's a bird looking back at her, and she wonders about it. So I had been working on birds a lot for this other book that I was doing, Snapper, so I've been looking at these Audubon illustrations, which are beautiful. And I knew about this cardinal, and it wasn't right for me, because look at all these birds are crying out, because it's about singing. I wanted the book to be something else. I was trying to rename it, Sing Oklahoma, or Sing Illinois, I think is what I wanted to rename it. I tried to rename this book. And so they're all crying. They all have this beaks open. So this didn't work. But I knew I loved this bird because of the turn of the head and the expression. And I also knew that cardinals, by doing all this crazy research of these birds, are one of the only birds that the female has color. And so I had these botany illustrations in my head from something else. And the thing I was flipping through them, I was like, oh, I'm going to go put it in one of those. I'm going to work with one of those flowers. And I saw this daisy image, and those leaves have this wonderful turning and twisting, and they come out into space, a lot like how good William Morris patterns kind of do that sort of push and pull. And so I put it all together. I disrupted the space by by taking them apart, giving the overlap, putting things in behind, and using the curve of those leaves, and still maintaining the flatness with the big type, it's always flat, and then the background is a flat color, sort of, but it has that bit of the noise and the texture to be able to merge with the illustrations themselves. A similar thing, but slightly different. I mean, this was one of those books that, as soon as I knew this was my title and at launch, I knew what I was going to do. I wanted a picture of Jacques D'Amboise, he's a ballet dancer, this is his memoir. I wanted him leaping in a field of blue. And I wanted to isolate him there, get him in the middle, and then interact with the type somehow. And so you have this relationship of the dimension of his photograph with the flatness of the blue. You have the leap, but it's still, because there's the space, so you're isolating the leap. And then the type itself is complicating everything by also being flat, but on top of him, he's pushing into that, but then the blue is pushing down. One of the things that I became at Knopf, I think, for a while, I was the person who designed the big science books. It just happened, and I love it. I love nonfiction. For some reason, nonfiction is so much easier for me. I guess because fiction's harder. That's what it is. Fiction's really hard. But the struggle was, how do you do a big science book without? This is about the end of the universe and the beginning of a new universe. How do we get back to the beginning of the universe? So how do you do that without showing a NASA picture of space, which are beautiful, but there's so many of those. So my process with these kinds of books are listening to the lectures the scientists are giving, or the writers, usually scientists, and finding that visual within sketching, and finding the visual either from their work or from something that they're talking about. And this is a diagram of a quantum gravitational loop. And it's actually almost exactly like the diagram, but it was a beautiful little piece that then I made function with the type in this way. This is another one of my favorites, and it's one of the ones that didn't ever make it. It was mostly due to my stubbornness and didn't listen to the people that were around me. But collage has that sense already of flatness with dimension. And so whenever you're doing that, you have that. Ephemera or collage, anything that has paper. But I really wanted to hyper, to take that even further with these pieces of newspapers that you would recognize from all over the world, Le Monde, whatever the German one is, the Times from England, the Financial Times, and the New York Times, and then create a striping effect. So I was really trying to push it into the world that these were formal shapes instead of pieces of paper, pieces of ephemera. I was so happy that Inksu got this through, because it's for Inksu, Lou, and Norton. And the type was so small, but it made so much sense to me that the graphic should dominate everything, and that it should draw you into the type because of what the subject was about, which is these artificial reality games that move you into a product even further than what you would normally get with a commercial product. Most people kind of hate me when I tell them how this one came about, because I love it and I think it's great. But I was on a train, and there was a guy over here that had something with a silhouette in his lap, and there was a person over here who had something with concentric circles in his or her lap, I can't remember. And that person, the paper or the fabric was folded a little, so it was distorted. And I saw those two, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I saw those, and I was like, that's it. And I went home and I made it. And it wasn't that far between that and then coming with that curve on the outside, and messing around with the formal energy of that ribboning effect. Now, the thing about these kinds of things is I actually think about, I use repeated linear elements a lot, like this kind of striping or lines. And I think the thing about them is for me they're more Art Nouveau than any kind of op art. They really are just, that's like it's taking Art Nouveau and contemporizing it into like a modern contemporary visual language. So when you work for a while as a book representative, probably a lot of people in this room know, you start to find yourself plateauing or getting tired of it all, and you have to find ways to keep interested. And I'm not saying you're not, and you love the books, you love the places you work. It's just, that's just part of life, I think, is you just get somehow a little complacent. I'm not sure. But I'm going to show you a few different things that I've done or to help me get out of that, or at least projects that have sort of opened me up a little more beyond necessarily designing covers. And one of them is designing covers, but it's designing a cover for a book that you love, that you have at your home, that you either hate the cover for or you jacket for, or you doesn't have a jacket. So I had this at my house, and it didn't have a jacket, and I was really stuck, and I was really bummed out, and I just decided I'm not going to design anything for my titles today, and I thought about it, and I had these old circuit board illustrations, and what's really interesting about the circuit board illustrations, because they had that secondary one on the bottom, was the connecting nodes, because it's not so obvious what they're for, but it really still relates to this language of robotics or computing, and so I found a way to work that with it tight. But this kind of thing, I do that. I've done it, not a lot, but I do it every once in a while. Just really fast, just flush something out, and sometimes it's great. And then I haven't used this ever, and then I started showing it, because I also think one of the things I believe as designers, you can show whatever you make, no matter, we all know this, but whether it's approved or not, some people have this idea that approved things are more valuable in some ways, and maybe they are in a way where if you work in a job, you know how to get things approved. But I think you should show things that are the best things you have, which is not the thing that was the final. And I don't even show the final for a lot of my stuff. I don't know. It's just a way of thinking. One of the projects that I did that was part of a jacket that I was really excited about was developing a code for this book by Nick Hargway, Angel Maker. And it's a novel about a clockmaker who becomes caught up in a super spy world. There's a giant doomsday machine at the end. And so I came up with this design, and I said, oh, I'm going to make a code. And I'm like, all right, make a code. And so I thought, oh, crap, I have to make a code. And I love codes. And I didn't want it to be a replacement code where you just have a symbol equals A, a symbol equals B. And I'd come up with this sort of shape from these punch cards that were from old computers that they use in the book, and it's a steampunk world, I didn't mention that, sorry. And clocks, so I was like, oh, it's a disc, and you punch these things out. And then that's not going to work if it's a replacement thing. So then I thought, how do you take time and translate it into letters? And then I found out that time zones are lettered. The Navy lettered them so that they can more easily talk about what time they are and what time zone. And so I put that onto the clock face, those letters, and then you have this key that you see in the blue there that allows you to punch out little pieces and spell syllables. So I was able to encode a syllable per symbol, which was pretty robust. I put clues on the jacket, we put clues in all of the publicity materials, because a video that the author did, any advertisement that went along with the book. And in the end, you actually get an extra piece of writing if you decode it. It's a backstory of one of the characters, and then it points you to a website, and then there's this alternate reality game that involves the code and other things. And it was amazing, it was wonderful. It took me so long, so much of my life was put into making that code. But it was beautiful, and I got to go back and forth with the author. I've done these sort of ink blot warshots test things for another jacket design in this red pink ink. And when I remember when I did them, I was like, they all look like pigs to me. And so when I got the Lord of the Flies, I was like, I know exactly what I'm going to do, because the piggy and the monster and everything. So this was my favorite of the whole bunch. And the thing that really works for me is not just the blood and the violence of it, but also it's like the blood violence plus the psychology of the ink blots, but it's the two levels of type that are they're abstractly flies. And I think that's the thing when I talk, I think about the guy wrestling himself. People love that idea of like something that's kind of clever, conceptual, that works, that's not too hard to figure out, but that isn't the thing, that isn't obviously the thing. So these little pieces of black tape flying around are clearly flies buzzing around the carcass of like the bloody dead pig at some level, but they're not. They're clearly not. But what I'm excited about is the flatness of that Warshots illustration, that it has so much depth and violence and anger and psychology suggestions sort of thing. But the two levels of type that go back and forth, the sort of distance of the small and the big, and it really captures the spirit of this horrifying tale of humanity that has always been so weird. When the way it's kind of dark. Most of them are dark, but I always feel like it's so dark. And so this is kind of showing a bit of the bloodiness, but in a way that maybe is too much. Maybe it's more commercial than I think it is. Speaking of horrifying human experiences, and not to laugh about it, this is a play about these 4 women in Ireland who starved themselves to death, and it's true. It's a true story. The play is not a true story. I mean, the play is written by a good friend of mine, and he asked me to do the cover, and I didn't put type on it. There's no type on it, except for the Oberon Modern plays, which has to be on all of their plays. They actually said, do you really want, we can take that off. And I was like, well, actually it gives it some authority because there's no type on it. People might think it's a zine or something. Who knows? But it was a struggle to make this decision, and I'm going to show you things, the reason why we decided to do this. I had designed the identity of his play company, theater company, that's what I mean. And this was the poster for the first show. They were called Dead Center. They often dealt with people who had died. So there's the logo at the bottom. And this is the poster that I wanted to happen for the show, Lippy. So this book is called Lippy. And on the left is what I first showed him. And I said, this is what I think your cover should be. And he's like, great, I love it. And then everyone talked to him. He's like, they all are worried. And like everybody in his company, the people who were publishing the book were actually pretty good about it. And they're like, they think I should have my name on it and the title. Well, yeah, but it'd be so great if it wasn't. And it's completely right for the story, because it's about these women who don't have an identity, but you're trying to lip read to find their identity from the CCTV footage, and so you're being obnoxious by actually trying to find their identity. So anyway, I said, so we could do this on the left. We could do, the right. We could do the type, or I could put lips on it. And this works because it's called Lippy, and there's a big scene at the end of the play where there's this close-up of lips on a screen where you see them moving. It's an homage to Beckett. And I honestly, I didn't want to put lips on it when I was first doing it, but I didn't put the title on it. So I was like, I guess I have to put one of them on it. And so I put the lips on it. And it makes sense to me. It's lippy, it's lips, it works. So that's my one jacket without lips. All right. So about a year ago, Greg Kulik left the art director position at Blue Rider Press, and I was lucky again to get that spot and become the art director of Blue Rider, where I've been for a little over a year. And I never wanted to be an art director. I actually wrote it on my performance and development thingy worksheet that you do in a corporate office with Joe and Darren. One of the things is like, what do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I wrote, I never want to be an art director. And I did it because I felt like you just didn't design. You dealt with so many other things. And then I'd seen Helen go be the art director of Riverhead. And she designed so much less, and it was so difficult, and all these all of these management things that she had to deal with all of a sudden. So but Blue Rider's special, and that's what's amazing. It was just right for me. The thing that I want to really say about going to Blue Rider and why I did it, I mean, I don't have to tell you, I don't have to say anything, but I promised that on my little thing on the talk. I was going to tell you why I left my dream job. Knopf was my dream job, and I don't know if I got it too early, but the last year and a half, I really just started to fail myself, I think. I started to really not be able to find or push past, couldn't push past that expected solution, or not expected, but at least decent solution that I could get to really easily. I didn't find a way to make myself do something that I thought was great over and over and over again. I did it every once in a while, but most of the time I don't know why. I wasn't having fun with my designs. It wasn't happening. And I feel like an ass because it's a great job and they're great books, and working for Carol Carson is amazing. Working with those people around me, Kelly Blair is there, was amazing. I sat next to Emily Mahon, who's the most wonderful person in the world. You probably can tell by the way she talked. She's so sweet and wonderful and human. And I left. I left to come to Blue Rider. And the reason I left is because I wanted to be scared again, I think. I wanted to not know what I was doing. I wanted to take risks, and that's the biggest thing I stopped doing at Knopf is stop taking risks. Or I remember the first time Sonny said, Sonny Mehta, the publisher, when I showed him a cover, and he said, "Really, Jason, you're putting the author upside down?" And he wasn't really mean. He's not mean at all. I mean, he's kind of hard, but it wasn't like actually being. It was just more like he was chiding me in a kind of a way that a father chides a son when they've grown out of these childish pranks. And I was like, oh, I can't put authors' names upside down anymore. Why can't I do that? And I've actually tried that 3 times now with Blue Rider, and it hasn't worked out. Anyway, I'm going to show you a few of the Blue Rider things. And this is the first design I showed. I walked in, and one of the secrets, I'm going to tell you one of the secrets of Knopf. One of the secrets of Knopf is they show one design. One design, that's it. And it's great because the author, or the editor, or the publisher, and then the author can say no or yes, and then they get another design. And you don't have to dig for like 8 things to show all at once. And you don't have any compromises after you show 8 things and they say, I want that from that, and that from that, and that from that. And you smush it all together and get a pile of poop. So I came in with this idea, I'm going to show one comp. And it's hard. It's really hard to enable that kind of atmosphere and dialogue between you and your publisher and you and your editors. But I do sometimes. So I showed this one comp. I show this one comp and you can't read the title or the author. It's black on black. And all you get is this little precise version. It's laws about assassination or being an assassin. And it's from a CIA guy. It's not fiction. It's nonfiction. And it's about precision and power and how being controlled is really the thing you need to do. So I pitched it. We'll put a spot gloss on it, and it worked out. And it's a little less black than I'm showing you here, but not too much. And yeah, that's okay. So my new job it's an eclectic list. The thing that ties them all together is the books are really good. But how do you package a book that Neil Young writes about all the cars he's owned in a really interesting way? I mean, it's just exciting for me. This is what I wanted. This is what we ended up doing. It's okay. It feels to me like an album art from the '90s or something like that. How do you package a political memoir, a memoir of a politician who's running for governor of Texas at that moment after being sort of famous, internet famous for last year? She's a beautiful, wonderful lady. I mean, beautiful as in like human, not attractive. She is too, but I'm not trying to say that because she's a woman. Live feed. I get to do science fiction. Science fiction is so exciting. I love science fiction. This is about 6 people who get superpowers that deal with time. And this is actually something I did for Greg while he was there. It's not the real thing, but I loved it. I'm so excited. And this is actually one of the reading this book was one of the reasons I came to Blue Rider. How do you make a self-help book good? I don't know. The fiction's amazing. This is a really, really great novel by Michael Hastings, and bizarre and sad and true. Now the other thing about being an art director that I love, and is that I have a junior designer. I have a designer. Sorry, bring you down, Spencer. But and I got to hire him, and it's so great working with him because the only person I really collaborated with is Helen, and now with Spencer it's this weird thing where I've had students for 8 years and I can't treat them like a student, but I've had that sort of relationship where I'm sort of a mentor, art director person to all my students. And he's great. It's fascinating to see someone new come in and just do stuff. This is a book by Simon Doonan about the combination, the way that fashion is also like an asylum, like a madhouse. This is another book he did, one of the first ones he did about using ecstasy in a way to go into yourself. It wasn't necessarily about medication, it was more about mindfulness. So, it's really, I love that he's coming in and making things. I remember when I did that. And I remember when Chip came by Helen's office and said, oh, it's those kids. I was there with like cutting paper and nailing with string or something. He's like, those kids with their string and paper. And, like, Spencer's that kid now for me. I don't do this anymore. This Nicholson Baker republishing of the first novel and combined with the second novel, we didn't really know what to do. It was really hard. It was a hard one to package, and he was doing these watercolors of a lot of the elements that were related to the book, and he made this beautiful cigar. And I thought, oh, that's perfect for the back. It was really the traveling sprinkler side that was the hard one. And once I had that, I was like, oh, that's going to work for it all. So he did the illustrations here, and I did the design, and it works together. And so this is a recto verso book that we came up with as an idea and pushed for, and they accepted it. I mean, that's the other great thing about Blue Rider for me right now is I sort of have an agency that's really wonderful. They trust me as a designer, but also as an individual thinker. I'm not sort of thought of as the art department that comes up with wacky ideas that they're trying to get through. And in the same light, one of the things that you realize once you become an art director, or actually just as you design in the industry, I think for a long number of years, is you start to understand the other side. You understand the sales, the marketing side. And even though I do that, I understand that we are the risk takers. We are the ones that need to push and to say that it's actually a good business strategy. It's a good sales strategy to make things that are unique, and to make things that are interesting, and to make things that are different from what's expected. I'm not going to show too much of what's going to come from this summer and fall from Blue Rider. I just don't. But I'll show you one. So I'm going to show you one, and then it'll be the end. But this is one of the things that I've done there that I'm most happiest about. And I didn't even know about this guy. William Cooper is one of the most bizarre people that has existed in the last 20 years. He's basically the person who gave the plot for X-Files. So anytime you watch the X-Files, you were watching his ideas about what was going on in the United States. And he's so wonderful and strange. And I went down this rabbit hole of conspiracy theory and then made this thing. And I think it's great. I mean, I'm just talking about how I feel, you know, when we're designers. The hard thing is you're on your own as a cover designer, and you have this sort of self-worth, and you're trying to say, what am I doing? Is it good enough? Is it great? Is it great? And then sometimes you feel like that, and I think that's good, and you should feel like that. So, I don't know, I like this one. Anyway, yeah.
We actually started a British-based office, and the idea was that we would be sort of working a little bit differently in both markets. And so this was, for me, this was mostly just more work because we were doing, they have different train sizes in Britain, and so we were doing all of the books. Well, not all the books, but some of the books in like 2 different formats. So I would have to do like 2 different covers. I think there's only a couple times that we specifically did a different cover for the British market. I think while I was working at Melville House, I had the chance to go to London a couple of times and see they have like an incredible literary culture over there, and it was really great. If you can, to travel and see bookstores in other cities, because we're all sort of working for different markets a lot. And just to see what the culture is like there. So I think it's mostly, we had different distribution in the US and the UK, and occasionally they would be split on things. And part of the benefit of having the British offshoot publisher was that when that happened, we could just do different covers that way. I would say that's mostly it. I mean, we were distributed by Random House in the US, and we would get a lot of sort of feedback and wisdom from the sales people about what works in the American market. And the British market is just different, and so our sales reps over there sometimes have different ideas.
I mean, you can be like Paul Serra and say, this is it. Don't get changes. But it's hard to be in-house and do that. Right. Unless you're Rodrigo Corral and you storm out if they say no. So once you get there, fine. But until you get to that point, it's a conversation. And I think the way to think about it is to try to get them to understand that you're a team with them. And the way that I think that I always take any suggestion, I hate suggestions. I hated suggestions from editors or authors or publishers. But now actually I'm really excited in my cover meetings with my publisher and my editors when we talk about things, because they actually have great ideas. They don't know how to solve that idea, or they don't know how to execute that. So I think the best thing to do is to listen, is to actually listen and pay attention when anyone's saying anything. Doesn't mean you should do it. Just have that, take it in, and give them what they really want, not what they said they wanted. That's the way I've always thought about it, is that they ask for something specific, maybe you have to show them a version like that. I don't know. I mean, if you don't, it's either like a fuck you, or maybe that, or you could just say, I tried that, it didn't work, this is what I think you really want. But you have to work your ass off to get to that. That's the trick, is if you don't come up with a thing that's really wowing them, if you don't come up with a thing that they forget about their idea, then they're just going to go back to their idea and just hammer you until you do it or leave, you know, in some way. And I know it's hard. That's the thing that I came to understand over the years is it's less about who the art director is often in imprint in terms of whether good work gets through or not, and more about who the editors and the publisher specifically is, and what the culture of those people and how much they trust their art director and their design. And that's a hard thing to kind of come to fruition. I mean, Carol and Sonny have a special relationship, and it's amazing. And I don't know, I've always been lucky to be around relationships like that.
I was really lucky in Melville House because we were so small. I just had a really great relationship, and I had a lot of like power and trust within the organization. And that accounts, like if anyone thinks that any of those covers are good, that accounts for 95% of it, seriously. But something that I've heard Peter say that I found to be true is in making relationships with people on the editorial side. I read everything. I just try to like know about everything that's happening. I try to read, you know, everything that's happening in the publishing industry. I want to know about like what novels are coming out, who's writing. Because when I'm dealing with editors and publishers, I can speak editor to them. Like we were thinking about the same things. And then when you're in a meeting, I remember once at a meeting in Melville House, overhearing them trying, like an editorial meeting, trying to decide who they should go to for blurbs for a book, and they were kind of striking out. And I sort of piped in from my corner, like, what about Charles Yu? And they were like, oh, that's a really good idea. And I was like, yeah, I read books. Things. So when you can speak with some authority about that world, like, I know what's going on, I know the things you're thinking about, I share your concerns, we're speaking the same language. I just found that made those relationships so much smoother. And like no one, it was really clear when you can establish yourself on an equal footing like that we're working together. And I feel like if you're in a situation where someone's just saying like, well, you're not allowed to say no to that, that's like not a great collaborating environment at all. So.
Yes, I read all fiction that I'm working on. Nonfiction, typically we don't necessarily even get all of the reading material up front, so like there's a few chapters, that's great.
Usually the book hasn't been written.
Yeah,
In my
that's
case,
true.
because I do more nonfiction, and in my case, sorry. And I feel like I work on more nonfiction than fiction, and usually, because we do the covers a year in advance, usually they've contracted the book based on a proposal for a sample. Oftentimes the book hasn't been written yet, so while I'm designing it, they're writing it. So I would love to read more of them.
The meat of the answer is actually it's easier to do a great book cover or a good book cover if you have things to read. Like the more you read, the easier it is to make something that feels connected to the book. Sometimes we don't get to read, I think is what we're also saying. Like to do things, someone asks you, or like as a freelance job, someone says, we need something by tomorrow, can you do it? This is what the book's about. I'm like, all right, and then you can't read the 500-page novel. So that happens sometimes. But
When you can read the 500-page novel, are you in the office reading the novel? Or
no, book cover designers often are like, we spend our time at home reading. We're readers. I think most of us, right? We're readers, we read. That's what we do. We don't, my junior came in, sorry Spencer, I'm recording, and even when you first start and you get a couple jackets or covers, he was reading the manuscripts at his desk, and I thought it was pretty normal. And then I got a call from someone saying, hey, you can't do that. Oh, okay.
I would like to say that I do that.
It's okay. You should be able to read at your desk. Part of your job. Not working.